Despite the negativity, overall it was a good day yesterday for Missouri in the portal. But when is it time to panic, especially at the quarterback position? Let's talk about all that and more. Right now I'm Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And by the way, the college football playoff is here, and you don't want to miss a moment of the action. The college football playoff presented by Allstate begins with 4 first-round games starting Friday and Saturday on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. And again, I do want to talk about when it is a good time to worry at the quarterback position here in the portal for Missouri. Also, I've decided that I would be willing to take a Kansas Jayhawk transfer to Missouri, but only under highly specific circumstances. So I'll talk about that later in the program. But fortunately, I have some good news to talk about. Since I posted my last show, there's been a lot of good news on the transfer front. First of all, especially on the defensive side of the football for Missouri, Santana Banner, first of all, a safety from Northern Illinois with 3 years left to play. I'd say he's a safe bet to take over Joseph Charleston's starting spot at safety next season. Did not allow a touchdown, by the way, according to Pro Football Focus in 2024, as the primary defender on any of his coverages. And also looks to be a very versatile player in the run game as well. So really a perfect fit for what Missouri needed on paper. By the way, hopefully, obviously a guy who played at Northern Illinois for a little bit. Hopefully he's a late bloomer, or the recruiting services were simply wrong, or likely a little bit of both. I know a lot of Missouri fans are upset at the portal right now. I totally get that. But it really is tough to fault a kid, for example, for moving up a level. I do understand, however, that when kids are sort of bouncing back and forth between SEC schools, that can get a little bit old for fans. I really do understand that. But back to Banner, in addition to losing Joseph Charleston, Missouri is going to be replacing Trevez Johnson and Sidney Williams off of this roster at safety as well. So this was a much-needed depth win at safety for Missouri, for sure. And one spot Missouri needed to replace a lot of depth is at linebacker as well, with a whole bunch of guys graduating and exhausting their eligibility at Mizzou this past season. Well, according to Power Mizzou and others who put this out there, West Virginia linebacker Josiah Trotter has committed to Missouri, son of former NFL star Jeremiah Trotter. By the way, for those of you who follow the league, that's definitely a familiar name for all of you. But probably here's the great thing about Trotter. Again, another guy with 3 years left to play, and he played rather well, according to all accounts, at West Virginia as a true freshman. By the way, was second on the Mountaineers with 93 tackles last year. So obviously this is a big blow for the Mountaineers, and quite possibly a blow to some of our young linebackers' hopes for significant playing time next season. Guys like Nick Rodriguez, there were guys who played a decent amount at linebacker, especially on special teams last season, but obviously Missouri felt like it needed to replenish its depth, because it wasn't just Josiah Trotter, but also Mikai Gbayor as well, a former Nebraska linebacker. Yes, Nebraska just took Williams Nwaneri from Missouri. Well, Mikai Gbayor coming back in a de facto trade, much like Josh Gray for Jordan Butler last season. Missouri in basketball, of course, Missouri in essence trading a young defensive player for a defensive player with much more experience, like Josh Gray on the basketball court. Well, on the gridiron here, the former Cornhusker Mikai Gbayor just has 1 year of eligibility remaining. So obviously Missouri wanted some experience to go with its youth. It's definitely talented youth. Nick Rodriguez, a guy that was recruited by Ohio State at linebacker. So you do wonder when young guys are seeing veterans come in at your position, and also guys with as many years of eligibility left as you have, well, it does make you wonder about potential movement in the future. But the bottom line is, the reality of college football is you can't really count on anything or anyone anymore, because while some people may like the idea, the players in particular are taking advantage of it in a lot of cases. I can't blame them for it. The idea that, hey, I'm a free agent 24/7, 365, well, that gives you a lot of leverage in some ways. But of course, there's another side of that too. Don't just expect me to coddle you and not recruit over you at your position, that type of deal. So bottom line here is, this is 3 good signings here on the Missouri defense. And with all of the consternation here that I've seen from many Missouri fans online, it's hard for me to gauge what percentage of Missouri fans are actually in panic mode right now. But again, although it's obviously disappointing to see Williams Nwaneri and Jaylen Brown on the move, I'd say even in particular Kewan Lacy. By the way, Lacy ended up at Ole Miss, where he was presumed, a lot of people thought, well, I'd say all of recruiting basically thought that Kewan Lacy a year ago on signing day was going to sign at Ole Miss. Well, then in the 11th hour, he ends up at Missouri. So it's one of those deals where it makes you think, there might have been a good NIL offer that came in there at the last second. It's got to make you question the value of those NIL deals if you're the person paying them out, when, hey, if things don't go slightly how this kid wants, this player wants, well, then maybe he can just take the money and then go back to where he really wanted to go originally for the next 3 years. There's a real balancing act that is obviously happening behind the scenes here. But regardless, I think from a fan's perspective, whether you like all this movement or not, if the point is, hey, is Missouri getting better or is Missouri getting worse? As always, during the portal, it's really important to see the end result and not live and die with every single defection and every single signing, because the last 2 cycles, really Missouri fans have been spoiled. As I've said before, if you're an everydayer of this program, Missouri's been spoiled the last couple cycles, not really losing any guys who were expected to be significant contributors, at least for the upcoming season. Well, obviously that hasn't been the case in this cycle. So what you have to hope is that who Missouri gets, in addition to these losses, you just got to hope that at the end of the day, it's a net positive. That's really all you can hope for, because the idea that, well, you're never going to lose somebody you like, clearly that's not realistic in our current structure. And you know what? If I were a betting man, as I said about 8 days ago, I would have guessed that Missouri would have had a quarterback in the portal by now. But at this moment, I'm not panicked. But there is going to be a moment that's going to come pretty quickly in theory where I will panic. I promise you. So I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna here. Let's break down where exactly Missouri stands at the quarterback position, at least in my humble opinion. But speaking of being a betting man, I'll tell you this, the best place to bet on the NFL action is obviously with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch while watching a game, you can check out all the stats, view the play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets over at FanDuel.com. And I have to say, The Missouri-Iowa 3.5-point line starting to make more sense to me the more I look at it. Iowa has such a good defense. I got to stop solely focusing on their lack of offense. That half a point, well, that really matters typically in an Iowa game, does it not? But regardless of what you think, you got to go to FanDuel.com and never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And in my opinion, if you're into daily fantasy sports, PrizePicks is the absolute best place to me. To me, it's just the simplest place to go because all you need is a couple hunches and you go with them. So make your holidays bigger and brighter with PrizePicks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. But as I said before, I like to keep my action a little bit smaller. So to me, just give me something like Travis Kelce, more than 70 receiving yards, and Lamar Jackson for more than 250 passing yards. Hey, if you've got fantasy thoughts, they don't need to be on your team. Take advantage of all your thoughts over at PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It is PrizePicks. Run your game. All things being equal in recruiting, especially in the transfer portal with the relatively short amount of time that these guys have to make their decision versus high school recruits, well, it's always best to get the first visit. But I got to say, Missouri obviously got the first shot at Miller Moss from USC, only to see him take his visit to Louisville and commit to the Cardinals. Well, Indiana, the Hoosiers, who of course about to make their college football playoff debut here in just a few days, well, the Hoosiers are obviously thinking about next season as well because you have to. That's the reality that all of these programs are living in right now. And the Hoosiers are getting the first visit at Fernando Mendoza, by the way, the erstwhile Cal Bear quarterback. His brother, by the way, his younger brother, is a true freshman quarterback at Indiana, by the way, which obviously would make it potentially a little bit weird with the older brother has a couple of years of eligibility left. That's sort of a strange situation there, but you can't completely dismiss the Hoosiers for a bunch of different reasons there. Obviously, their coach feels like he's the quarterback whisperer at the moment. Will he be able to convince Fernando Mendoza of the same thing? Well, we shall see. Another quarterback that I think I and a lot of Missouri fans have been interested in is Maalik Murphy, who was Duke's starting quarterback last season, set the Blue Devils touchdown passing record last season, was formerly of the University of Texas as well. And I'm seeing that Murphy is currently visiting the University of Kentucky. And all I would say, my reaction to that is surely if Missouri really wanted Maalik Murphy, that they could land him over the Wildcats. God love Mark Stoops and all he's done down there at Kentucky, but it does feel like offensively, at the very least, that team has hit a bit of a ceiling, especially without Liam Cohen as their offensive coordinator. So to me, going back to Fernando Mendoza and, of course, Maalik Murphy as well, if Missouri does not get one of those two guys, say Mendoza commits to Indiana and Maalik Murphy commits to Kentucky, well, to me, then's the moment when I and Missouri fans have permission to go full Kent Brockman panic mode and start busting each other's skulls open and feasting on the goo inside. That really is the ultimate panic moment for me, because I think you can make a real good argument one way or the other that Mendoza and Maalik Murphy could be preferable to Miller Moss, for example. And there's lots of people out there who liked Connor Wigman and a bunch of other options out there as well. But to me, it seems like Mendoza and Murphy, those are the last two really good options for Missouri. And if the Tigers do not get one of those guys, well, then you can start to panic a little bit and start to wonder, hey, what is going on right now? And I've seen a lot of Missouri fans saying that just based on these portal exits here the last few days that, oh, something stinks and there's got to be something wrong with the program here. I would caution everybody to panic quite that strongly at this point. Missouri has 20 wins in the last 2 seasons with a chance to get 21 here in less than 2 weeks in the Music City Bowl. So, yes, again, I think Missouri fans have gotten a little bit spoiled in the last couple transfer portal cycles, and all the comments I've been getting lately to the negative side over on YouTube are kind of speaking to that, in my opinion. So before Kewan Lacy decided to enter the transfer portal, I'd been saying for a couple weeks at least that I was perfectly comfortable with having Lacy and Jamal Roberts and whoever else on the Missouri roster, Tavoris Jones, Austin Dindy, and of course any true freshman, Marquise Davis, for example, that have been added onto the roster recently as well. I was really comfortable with just rolling with who Missouri had and not going into the portal for a running back. But as I said on yesterday's program, with Lacy entering, well, that changes the calculation quite a bit. And listener Stewart points out that Kanye Udo, the Army starting running back, is in the portal, supposedly is going to be visiting Missouri very soon. And it does seem like, just reading the tea leaves, that Udo is a strong possibility for the Tigers. And there is no doubt that Eli Drinkwitz typically likes a lot of experience at the running back position, as we saw last season when Drinkwitz brought in not one, but 2 4-year players in Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll to be his 2 lead backs. Now, as for the wide receiver position, Missouri adding former Mississippi State receiver Kevin Coleman, formerly of the St. Louis area in high school as well. Huge addition for the Tigers. He's probably going to be your number 1 receiver next season, barring another addition and more likely someone on this current roster like Josh Manning may be really emerging in a huge way next season. So Gerard Hamilton over at Power Mizzou is asking, hey, does Missouri need another receiver in this cycle? And I'll answer that question. Does Missouri need one? I would say no. But would I take one if the right receiver were available and can upgrade the talent on the roster? Yes, absolutely. No question. Because one thing that Missouri, while it's often struggled at times, for sure last season, they had 2 real number 1 receivers for all intents and purposes. To me, Theo Weiss in so many ways was every bit as reliable as Luther Burden, and in other ways was more reliable, maybe down the boundary of the sidelines, that type of thing. So regardless, both of those guys were legitimate SEC receivers that could frequently win their matchups downfield, break tackles in the open field, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully Kevin Coleman can be that guy. Missouri certainly needs another one of those guys. So if there's one out there, by all means, take him. But I do think there's enough talent on the roster currently with guys like Manning and Daniel Blood and Speedy Johnson, Crutchfield, Madison, all these different players. There's a bunch of options for Missouri. But so they need one? No. Could they use one who's as good as a Theo Weiss type of transfer? Yeah, absolutely. Then you do take that guy. And coming up with a former Jayhawk, Deshaun Warner, is still on the portal market, and Missouri reportedly at least somewhat interested. It does make me ask the question, would you take a Jayhawk at Missouri? Well, my answer is I would, but under very specific circumstances. So let's talk about that here in just a second. But first, it is that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, It's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. So about a week ago, I asked all of you for your feedback on whether Missouri should ever take a Jayhawk in the transfer portal. Well, Jake, one listener, said, if we can get a great player, I don't care where they come from. Plus, we can make Kansas angry in the process. Win-win. If the kid has seen the light and wants to come to Mizzou just in time to get a game in against his former team next season, I say let him. M-I-Z. Well, honestly, when I started my segment on this about a week ago, I wasn't even totally sure where I was going to land on the topic when I started. And a big part of me wanted to just yell no into the microphone and say, never, I hate Jayhawks, but I just couldn't quite make myself do it. I really couldn't. And eventually it would have seemed silly because in the portal world that we live in, it does seem inevitable. But I have to say I was heartened by this. My old buddy, Blake Stark, a many-time co-host of this podcast and the Old for Old Missouri podcast back in the day, he responded via text, no, we take no KU trash ever. And I said, hey, man, it's eventually going to happen. And Blake said simply, F that. But he didn't say F. So again, I have to say I loved that response from Blake. It made me feel good. It really did. But later via email, maybe Blake calmed down just a tiny bit. He said, on John's show today, this was in a big email thread with a whole bunch of diehard Mizzou fans. He said, John brought up this topic. I said, absolutely not. But here's some terms. Unless said player has a press conference and publicly repudiates everything said about that, quote, school and that, quote, state. Here is the statement that must be signed. I, former KU trash, hereby wish to beg the forgiveness of the great University of Missouri and their vastly superior fan base and express my gratitude for rescuing me from that soul-sucking, worthless hellhole and its slack-jawed, moronic, and terror-supporting fan base. Truman answered my prayers, and I'll thank him every day for the rest of my life for saving me from ever having to don that repulsive, hideous cartoon terrorist mascot again. Again, I'm so sorry. F them, F all of them. Signed, your name. And then as one final term, this person must get a William Quantrill tattoo somewhere that is very, very visible on their body. So God bless Blake Stark, who is the king of an entertaining anti-KU email. I will just add this. By the way, I couldn't think of a time where a Kansas guy has come to Missouri in either men's basketball or football, but it has gone the other way. I will point this out. Parker Brown, of course, the former Missouri Tiger basketball player under Conzo Martin, well, he transferred to Kansas eventually. After being on the West Coast, he ended up with his brother at KU. And honestly, at least from my perspective, if anything, it increased my disdain for the Jayhawks a tiny bit. It certainly didn't decrease the rivalry for me whatsoever. And to the original point there from Jake, my listener, no doubt if Missouri gets Deshaun Warner in the portal, well, hey, that's a competitive advantage in week 2 for 2025. Not only is Missouri helping its roster in theory, but you're hurting the Jayhawks as well. Isn't that all that really matters, by the way, is actually beating Kansas in football and basketball? I certainly think so. But regardless, I'm just glad that the hate is very much still coursing through a lot of diehard true son and daughters veins. So, you know what? Thanks for sticking with me on this episode of Locked On Mizzou and making this show your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Chris Gordy's Locked On SEC. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts as well, and find me on the show just about every Thursday on the squad as well. So until next time, I am John Miller. This has been Locked on Mizzou.